absolute, iti, thus, yat, which, viduhu, known as, ajasha, unlimited, sukham, happiness, vishokam, without grief. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation. What is realized as the absolute Brahman is the cause of unlimited bliss without grief. That is certainly the ultimate phase of the Supreme Enjoyer, the personality of Godhead. He is eternally void of all disturbances and fearless. He is complete consciousness as opposed to matter. Uncontaminated and without distinctions, He is the principal primary cause of all causes and effects, and in whom there is no sacrifice for fruitive activities, and in whom the illusory energy does not stand. Purport. The Supreme Enjoyer, the personality of Godhead, is the Supreme Brahman, or the Saman Burnham, because of His being the supreme cause of all causes. The conception of impersonal Brahman realization is the first step, due to his distinction from the illusory conception of material existence. In other words, impersonal Brahman is a feature of the absolute distinct from the material variegatedness, just as light is a conception distinct from its counterpart, darkness. But the light has its variegatedness, which is seen by those who further advance in the light, and thus the ultimate phase of Brahman is the source of the Brahman light, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Saman Burnham, or the ultimate source of everything. Therefore, meeting the personality of Godhead includes the realization of the impersonal Brahman, as realized at first in contrast with material inebriety. The personality of Godhead is the first step of Brahman realization. As explained in the first canto, one must understand all three features of the Absolute, Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. Patibodha Matram is just the opposite conception of material existence. In matter, there are material miseries, and thus, in the first realization of Brahman, there is a negation of such material inebrities, and there is a feeling of eternal existence distinct from the pangs of birth and death, disease, and old age. That is the primary conception of impersonal Brahman. The Supreme Lord is the Supreme Soul of everything, and therefore, in the Supreme Conception, affection is realized. The conception of affection is due to the realization of soul to soul. A father is affectionate to his son because there is some relationship of nearness between the son and the father. But that sort of affection in the material world is full of inebriety. When the personality of Godhead is met, the fullness of affection becomes manifested because of the reality of the affectionate relationship. He is not the object of affection by material tinges of body and mind, but he is the full, naked, uncontaminated object of affection for all living entities because he is the super soul or Paramatma within everyone's heart. In the liberated state of affairs, the full-fledged affection for the Lord is awakened. As such, there is an unlimited flow of eternal, everlasting happiness without the fear of it being broken, as we have experienced here in the material world. The relationship between the Lord is never broken. Thus, there is no grief and no fear. Such happiness is inexplicable by words, and there can be no attempt to generate such happiness by fruitive activities, as arrangements and sacrifices. But we must always know that happiness, unbroken happiness, in exchange with the Supreme Person, the personality of Godhead, as described in this verse, transcends the impersonal conception of the Upanishads. The Upanishads are in the Upanishads, the description is more or less negation of the material conception of things. But this is not denial of the transcendental sense of the Supreme Lord. Herein also the same is affirmed in the statements about the material elements. They are all transcendental, free from all contamination of material identification. And also the liberated souls are not devoid of senses. Otherwise, there cannot be any reciprocation or unhampered spiritual happiness exchanged between them in spontaneous and unbroken joy. All the senses, both of the Lord and of the devotees, are without material contamination. They are so because they are beyond the material cause and effects, as clearly mentioned herein, Sadasataha Param. The illusory material energy cannot work there, being ashamed of the Lord and His transcendental devotees. In the material world, the sense activities are not without grief, but here it is clearly said that the senses of the Lord and the devotees are without any grief. There is a distinct difference between the material and spiritual senses. One should understand it without denying the spiritual senses because of material conception. The senses in the material world are so charged with material ignorance. In every way, the authorities have recommended purification of the senses from the material conception. In the material world, the senses are manipulated for individual and personal satisfaction, whereas in the spiritual world, the senses are properly used for the purpose for which they originally meant, namely, the satisfaction of the Supreme Lord. Such sensual activities are natural, and therefore sense gratification there is uninterrupted and unbroken by material contamination, because the senses are spiritually purified. And such satisfaction of the senses is equally shared by the transcendental reciprocators. Since the activities are unlimited and constantly increasing, there is no scope for material attempts or artificial arrangements. Such happiness of transcendental quality is called Brahma Soka, which will be clearly described in the 5th canto. Om Jnana Timidhandasya Jnana Jana Shalakaya Chakshuhun Milatam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurubhe Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhishram Sabitam Hena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Gurum Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurum Vaishnavamsya Shri Rupam Sagritatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vidam Tam Sajivam Sarvetam Sarvadutam Parjana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhan Vedamsya He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanda Yada Kanta Namostude Tapta Kanchana Goyangi Ade Vrindavaneshari Vrishabhanu Sudhe Devi Pranamami Haripriye Vantakalpata Rupyascha Kripa Sindhu Bhaevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadaya Shivasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. Welcome to today's Srimad Bhagavatam class. Thank you very much for being here, those on Viper TV, Facebook, YouTube, and everyone here today. In this verse in particular, the Srimad Bhagavatam explains the absolute truth in the form of Krishna. So, in this verse particularly, it is explained that the Supreme Lord is beyond all material designations within this universe. And the second thing that this verse explains is that the Lord is a primeval enjoyer. So, on that note, there's one point that has been made by His Holiness Radhanath Swami. He said that the Srimad Bhagavatam is meant for those who are pure. And he quoted the purport of Srimad Bhagavatam 2.3.14, where Srimad Bhagavatam is described as the Paramahamsa Samhita. And it's in that purport it says that the Paramahamsa Samhita, or the Vedic literature, meant for the topmost, is meant for the topmost transcendentalist. So from this we can understand that individually we are not capable enough of speaking on the Srimad Bhagavatam. We can't make our own commentary on the Srimad Bhagavatam. However, only by hearing the Srimad Bhagavatam from the Parampara can we actually understand the Srimad Bhagavatam. So from this I just wanted to say that in no ways am I qualified to speak on the Srimad Bhagavatam. But Srila Prabhupada is so merciful that we can actually understand the scripture through the words that he's put through his commentary. So on that note, what I might be saying, I'll just be repeating what I've read, what I've heard. So I'm praying for all of your blessings so I may somehow or other succeed in this attempt to glorify Srila Prabhupada and the Lordships. So to this verse more deeply, this beautiful purport by Srila Prabhupada explains two things. The first thing it does is it establishes Brahman, or the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So it defines clearly what Brahman is. The second thing that it does is that it describes how he's opposed to the qualities of material life. So what he says in this purport is that impersonal Brahman is the first step of God realization. So we can see that in the purport, it's mentioned that there are 3 stages of approaching the absolute truth. There is Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. So there are 3 steps, and we must understand those 3 steps before we go to the absolute truth. The absolute truth is like a whole picture. So in this regard, a very simple example that has been given by His Grace Laghavan Prabhu, he gave an example when he was trying to make a point that we shouldn't be too over-enthusiastic by saying Brahman is wrong. Very commonly we see devotees who are enthusiastic, but they're also over-enthusiastic, and they go to the Mayavadis and say you're wrong. Laghavan Prabhu, he gave an example that somewhere in India there were 3 residents of one village. And in the village, they realized that the train was going to come. Now, the villagers have never seen a train before. So they started speculating, what is the train? What does it look like? So there were 3 residents. Those 3 residents, they went to the train at 3 different days during the night time. The first person, what he did, he went to the train. From a distance, he saw the train, it was coming, and he saw light. So he returned, very, very bright light. So he returned to the rest of the residents. He said, oh, the train is light. There's only light. It's, just light. So the second resident, what he did, he went the next day, night, and he went and he saw that there was light. He wasn't wrong, there was light. But he went more closer and he could see it was like a box. He said it's a box. It has wheels, engine, the outer structure. So he returned to the villagers and said that it's light and it's a box as well. Then the third resident came, and the third resident went there. In the beginning he saw light, then he went closer, he saw the box. However, when he went more closer, he went inside the train. Then he saw seats, he saw AC, he saw interior lights, the bus driver, the train driver, everything. So he returned and he said that this is what I've actually seen. So the question here is, who was actually right? The first person, the second person, or the third person? Now, when we look at this, none of them are wrong. These 3 people, they're not wrong in any regard. However, what has actually happened is that one person was more detailed, more accurate, more towards the absolute truth than the rest of the villagers. So similarly, different people in this world may be situated in different paths. We can see that there are so many different religions, so many different types of paths that people follow. But some people follow on the Brahman level, the impersonal level. Other people are focused on the Paramatma level, while others are more directly towards Brahman, the Bhagavan level. So we can't say that anything is wrong necessarily. I personally, I've just come out of my prelim examinations, and there, one topic that we have is English. So in English, those who have sat exams before know that in English there are 5-mark questions, or 2 marks, 3 marks, 4 marks, 5 marks. Now, in English, the topic is such that there's no right or wrong answer. There's no wrong answer. What really matters is how detailed you explain it, how close you get to the actual point. So in the same regard, we can't say that Mayavadis are wrong. As Srila Prabhupada has mentioned here, they're still part of the absolute truth. They deserve to be respected. However, they're not, as we should understand, they're not as close as what Krishna consciousness offers us. In Bhagavad Gita 4.11, I'm pretty sure we all know this verse pretty well. Yeta mam prabhadyante tamsateva bhajamyaham mama vartmanu vartante manushya parta sarvasaha. So in this verse, Krishna says that all of them, as they surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. Everyone follows my path in all respects, O son of Pritha. So everyone follows the path of Krishna consciousness in some way or another. Sometimes they're in Brahman realization, sometimes Paramatma, sometimes Bhagavan. Nevertheless, they still follow the absolute truth. Indirectly or directly, they are still on this path. And impersonalism, when we look historically through what we've been given in Srimad Bhagavatam and Bhagavad Gita, we can see that impersonalism itself, we can't say it's incorrect, but there are some misconceptions that happen. So when we look at the history of impersonal Brahman, we can see that the history of impersonal Brahman goes as far back as when Lord Buddha first appeared. When Lord Buddha came, there was a lot of sinful activities happening on the name of the Vedas. So what he did is that to stop those sinful activities, he kind of drew them away from the Vedas and taught them non-violence, nirvana, all those different types of philosophies. Then Lord Shiva actually came afterwards as Sankaracharya. Now this is when impersonalism or impersonal Brahman first made its entrance. Because what happened is the Buddhists, they started neglecting the Vedic scriptures. So Sankaracharya, as we know, he came and he drew them in almost like a magnet. He drew them in through the philosophy of impersonalism, which is basically focusing. It doesn't go focusing on the Brahmajyoti, doesn't go beyond the Brahmajyoti. So he explained that. Then we could see that there were many acharyas that came after Sankaracharya. So Madhavacharya, the Brahmanujacharya, Nimbarka Nimbarkacharya, and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu as well. They all came and eventually they started building this platform further and further until what we have now today, which is Achinta Veda Aveda Tattva. So what we can understand is that they're all in one path. As it is historically, they're all in one path, but they still make the same, they lead to the same point. So in that regard, impersonalism, it's not incorrect, but it's not as accurate and detailed as we can imagine it. So I was listening to a class by His Holiness Bhakti Bringer Govinda Maharaj. He was giving a class in Russia in, I think, 2011 or 2010. And he was saying that to approach Krishna's absolute form, we have to be in the mode of pure goodness. So otherwise what happens is that when we are not in the mode of pure goodness, we get stuck in so many material complexities. The happiness that we aspire for, the happiness that is material, everyone that wants happiness. So everyone goes through so much suffering, so much hankering to get happiness. And what we can see in our own society, in our own, in the public in general, is that people are willing to go through so much pain, so much suffering to get few moments of happiness. But the happiness itself is material. It's material goodness. So we can, I'm a youth, for example. I can say from my own experience, we can see people with headphones in their ears listening to upbeat music, or they go on social media, they use the hashtag good vibes or something, good vibes, happy vibes or something, or they use their phone constantly. If you actually go and ask them, why are you doing all this? The answer will ultimately go to, I want to be happy. If you don't want to be happy, why will you do all this stuff? But we can see that this happiness, it's material, it's not spiritual. And because it's material, there are so many limitations on it. I was listening to a class by His Holiness Mahavishnu Goswami Maharaj. He gave a very, very nice point. He was saying that material happiness can be defined as a temporary relief period between two distresses. And to illustrate this point, he gave an example how in the olden days, in the past, as a method of punishment in American history, what they would do is that they would tie the person's hand to the back, the criminals, they'll tie their hands to the back, they'll get their head, and then they'll push them into the water. And what will happen is that they'll be in the water and they'll be gasping for breath. Literally, like their head is in the water, their hands are tied to the back. And just when there are moments away from drowning, just a few moments away, then the police, the law enforcers, they pick up the head and it takes a few breaths of relief. And those few breaths, they're seen as great happiness. And then what he doesn't know is that after a few seconds, he has to go back to the same situation again. So material happiness is just like this. It's always flickering. We go through this stress and we go through happiness. It's like, as Bhagavad Gita says, it's like the appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They keep coming. But one has to learn not to, to tolerate them. One should not be disturbed by them necessarily. So from this, we can understand that our hankering for happiness is just like, putting our heads into the water. When we put our heads into the water, we go through so much suffering, so much pains, to get those few moments of happiness. In the second verse of Bhaja Hare Mana, I think we all know this bhajan, the second verse written by Govinda Das Kaviraj, he said, Sita atapata bata berishana, edina jamini jagire, bifale se vinu kripana dulajala chapala sukha labalagire. So the translation, Sita Atapata, is actually described as a fraction of flickering happiness. He says that for a fraction of flickering happiness, I have uselessly served wicked and miserly men. So everyone is actually afflicted by ignorance of what is actually happiness. Everyone hankers so hard to get those few moments of happiness, but that happiness is not actually happiness. That's just a few moments of happiness that come after so much suffering. So because of this, the society itself, they're being misled. They're not understanding what is actually happiness. And in Bhagavad Gita 18.36, Srila Prabhupada, he gave a very popular quote, and he says, a Christian soul tries to enjoy material happiness again and again. Thus, he chews the chewed. Chewed the chewed. This is a very common saying. We can see Prahlad Maharaj also made this point as well. Material happiness is it's just like chewing the chewed. Like we keep, for example, any fruit, like an orange or something, we chew. The taste is there, but when we keep biting it again and again, it doesn't have its flavor. In this regard, I was also listening to a class by His Grace Laghavan Prabhu, and he said that in Egypt there's a type of fruit or the type of leaf that is very sharp, and what the people do in Egypt, is that they eat the leaf, and it tastes very sweet. It's very sharp. And it's very sweet, and they keep eating it. What they don't realize is that this leaf of fruit is very sharp. It's actually their blood that they are tasting, the blood that is very, very sweet. So they're actually putting pain on themselves, but because the taste is so sweet, they keep on going. This is the same thing as material. This is the same thing that material happiness can be referred to. Like we go after so much happiness, but we don't get that much. Instead, we get so much suffering in ourselves. So some of the great acharyas have also explained that being situated in the mode of goodness materially is also a mode of suffering. So, as we know, there are three modes of goodness: sattva, rajas, and tamas. Goodness, passion, and ignorance. But all these three modes of material nature, they're under the material nature, under the material way of living. And because of this, until we actually transcend these three modes of material nature, we will always find suffering. So everyone thinks that by becoming situated in happiness, we become happy. Everyone, they will try to get, positive vibes going around, positive vibrations, because they want to be happy. They understand that you have to be in the mode of goodness to become happy. However, what people don't understand is that we have to go beyond that to the mode of pure goodness. Otherwise, we actually never become very happy. So now the question actually arises: how do we situate ourselves in pure goodness? We've already explained how the material mode of happiness is not very positive, so to speak. It's not very nice. So how do we transcend this to the mode of pure goodness? Because pure goodness itself, it's beyond the three modes of material nature. Now, in Bhagavad Gita 14.26, Krishna says, Mamta yo vabhicharena bhakti yogena sevate saguna samati jagyan brahma bhuyaya kalpate. There he says that one who engages in devotional service, unfailing in all circumstances, at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus comes to the level of Brahman. Now, in this regard, the last part, it says, thus comes to the level of Brahman. Now, for a person who first reads this translation or reads this translation, it might be very confusing. Why is Krishna saying comes to the level of Brahman? But when we read the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains this very, very nicely. He says that this means that one must qualitatively become one with Brahman. By attainment of Brahman, one does not lose his eternal Brahman identity as an individual soul. So we must not become confused between Brahman and impersonal Brahman. Srila Prabhupada says, but by the attainment of Brahman, one does not lose his Brahman identity. He still keeps his individual identity as a soul. However, he's qualitatively one with the Supreme Lord. So that is what we can understand as beyond impersonal Brahman. So this verse says that one transcends the modes of material nature when one engages in devotional service. So devotional service itself, it's seen as something very, very minor, very small, but actually has so much importance in what we do. Because to transcend the modes of material nature, that's our only path that we can actually follow. And for one to transcend the modes of material nature, one has to do devotional service. We can see for ourselves, coming Krishna consciousness, we can see that people in this world suffer so much stress, anxiety, depression, some even contemplating suicide as well. And they go through great lengths to get those small moments of happiness. However, by doing devotional service, we can actually see that all devotees, they're always very happy. No one, like you go to a temple, for example, you don't see a devotee crying while having prasadam, or crying while reading, or like in complete grief or moroseness. It doesn't happen. Because the devotees are always happy, they're always smiling. In this regard, I do remember, I think, when I was younger, I think year 5 or year 4 or something like that. What happened is that we were going, at school we were doing a project, we were recording each other. We had to make a small movie. So I recorded this person, and I asked, 9, 10-year-old me, I'm like, can you please smile? And this person, I was shocked. I said, can you please smile? He starts crying in front of me. And I'm thinking, why are you crying? And then I started getting very confused, like, why is he crying? I mean, I've asked him to smile, he's not smiling. And after that, I called him afterwards, I think maybe half an hour after. He was on Google and he actually wrote how, I'm not even joking, like hand on my heart, this is what he wrote. On Google, on the search bar, he wrote, how to smile. And I was shocked. How do you mean how to smile? And he searched it on Google, and there are so many articles, so many websites, so many images just to help you smile. And I went through it a little bit with him, and like head positioning, like how you move your body and everything. What is this? I mean, material happiness. People become so confused. Material happiness, they don't even know how to smile now. However, when we look at devotees, like, I'm sure no devotee goes on Google and searches up how to smile. That doesn't happen. I know from my own experience, Guru Maharaj, for example, he's known as Janananda Goswami Maharaj. Those who know him, he's always smiling. And I remember once I was in Auckland, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, and it was his last day in Auckland, and I think he was going to Melbourne or Brisbane or something. And he was there, and we had a final program. And when Maharaj, when he stood up, I just started crying. Like, I just let it out, because I don't know, I mean, if I didn't want to leave Guru Maharaj or something, but I just started crying. And I remember, like, all the God brothers were looking at me like, oh, why is he crying now? And then Maharaj, we were walking, and Maharaj was at the outside of the house. We go to Maharaj, and Maharaj looks at me, and then I won't forget this, I'll never forget this, but he looks at me, and then he, makes some, like almost, like imitate, not imitating, but like, making fun of me, so to speak. He makes, playfully crying face. And Maharaj has this gift of always making someone smile. And immediately, like, I just started crying at that instant. So Maharaj, we can see that he's always smiling. Not even Guru Maharaj, but all the devotees, they are always smiling. But the question is, why do they smile? Smiling itself is such an important thing nowadays. But how do the devotees smile so effortlessly? It is because they are engaging in devotional service. Like we all know in Bhagavad Gita, it says that devotional service, it is, I think I made this point maybe a couple of months ago, but in Bhagavad Gita it says devotional service is everlasting and it is joyfully performed. Devotional service is a source of great happiness. It's joyfully performed. So the devotees, we can understand that in Krishna consciousness, real happiness is when we do devotional service. And I'm running out of time here, but there's a few points that I have left to make. Srila Prabhupada actually explains what is real happiness. And in the purport to Bhagavad Gita, 12.18 to 19, in the purport, Srila Prabhupada says that the devotee is happy in all circumstances. Sometimes he may not get palatable foodstuffs, sometimes he may get palatable foodstuffs, sometimes not, but he is satisfied. Nor does he care for any residential facility. He may sometimes live underneath a tree, and sometimes may live in a great palatial building. He is attracted to neither. Isn't this what we want in our material world right now? People, they go through so much pains. There are so many people who strive for wealth, strive for opulence, strive for fame. But they're still not happy. But a devotee, Srila Prabhupada explains, a devotee can can sleep under a tree, cannot be fed properly. He is still happy. So, sometimes people do get confused that they see devotees who are very happy and they ask, how are you so happy? We have so much money, so much wealth, but we are still not happy. So probably the reason we're actually happy is because we do devotional service. And another point that has been made by Srila Prabhupada in Srimad Bhagavatam 4.21.33, Srila Prabhupada says that a devotee is happy even in this life because although he is a material existence, we have many needs, all his material needs are satisfied. And when he at last quits his body, he goes back home, back to Godhead without a doubt. So we can see that a devotee is happy not only when he goes back home, back to Godhead, but even in this life. Why is he happy? It's because he understands that all his needs are satisfied. In other words, he leaves everything to Krishna. Everything is left unto Krishna. He fully surrenders unto Krishna. Isn't this what devotional service actually is? Devotional service is a process of us surrendering unto Krishna. And when we surrender to Krishna, we can actually see that when we surrender unto Krishna, we can understand that, everything is up to Him. Like we all know that famous quote, "Not a blade of grass moves without the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead." Without Krishna's ordainment, nothing can happen. So from this we can understand that whatever happens, it happens out of Krishna's arrangement. So that's the benefit of doing devotional service. We can see that when we do devotional service, so many issues that happen in the world can actually be solved. So on that note, it's already 8:30. On that note, just to reiterate the point that we have to really focus on service, because service is the only way we can actually transcend to the absolute truth. And my own Guru Maharaj, he's known as Janananda Goswami Maharaj, he once gave a class, and this quote, to me personally, it represented our mood when we do devotional service. Because devotional service, it's not that hard to do. Like you get a mop and you broom the temple floor. Or you distribute some books at the table, or you serve prasadam. Or you even eat prasadam, you don't know. But we have to be careful when our mood actually is in devotional service. And I remember Guru Maharaj, he was giving a class and he made a very amazing point. And with this point, I'll conclude today's class, just a summary point. Takeaway point for today. Guru Maharaj says, "May this body perish in Srila Prabhupada's service. Without the shelter of his lotus feet, I have no shelter." I repeat, may this body perish in Srila Prabhupada's service. Without the shelter of his lotus feet, I have no shelter. We can understand that personally, in our situation, we have no shelter except for Srila Prabhupada or our spiritual master or the lordships themselves. So our mood should be that we have to try and get that shelter. That once we are under that shade, under that umbrella, then we can actually go and progress onwards towards the absolute truth. So on that note, I'll conclude here. Thank you very much for being here today. As all of you know, I'm probably either your younger son or your younger brother. I'm very junior, in giving classes. In devotional service as it is, I'm very junior. So please bless me, please pray for me to the Lordship, so I may somehow or other improve in this service and be more of a service to the Parampara. So Hare Krishna, thank you very much for being here. Jagadaguru Srila Prabhupada ki, Srila Srimad Bhagavatam Mahaprana ki, Nitai Gaur Paramanande.